when it's on. Today we got a super guest MC, master of ceremonies himself, Tony Fortunato. And you're going to notice that Tony goes a lot, and that means he's from Canada. But we love him. Okay. Now, and then we got a good friend, Mike. We've known each other for, I think, the last time we were in jail together. But it's been a while. And Mike's going to talk today about some of the scary things he's seen. And between him and Tony, got hundreds of hours in front of customers and scary things that go on in networks. So, Tony, take it away, boss. And thank you for being our MC today.
Thanks, Tim. So like Tim said, we got good old Mike's joining us. And you know what's really funny? Mike and I have messaged back and forth over probably the years, but I don't think I've ever actually visually met the guy. So
no.
So that's this is a cool thing. Well, maybe.
Yeah.
Depends on how we look, but anyways. So Mike's called a principal strategic architect, which I assume means he has a lot of war wounds from running around trying to fix stuff. And he's from Viavi Solutions. So there's just a little note we're going to put in the show notes for everybody. And that is that there's 2 webcasts that Viavi is going to be putting on. One's about virtualization, and one is about SDN. And one's for November 2nd, and the other's for the 9th. So thanks for giving us a bit of your time, and I'm going to pass it over to Mike and see what he's got to say.
Yeah, thanks, Tony, and thanks, Tim, for inviting me to the Wednesday forum. This is an honor, and likewise, Tony, it's good to finally physically see you. It's been emailing over the years, etc. So we got to thinking, I was talking to Tim a few weeks ago and got to thinking, okay, Halloween's coming up, and wouldn't it be really cool to do, the top scariest things that we hear from network engineers? And we got to talking and swapping war stories, and a lot of it is some of these things that, I've been doing this for about 26 years now, and nothing's really changed, right? I mean, the technology, of course, has changed, but the problems, shifted higher up the OSI model. But network is still guilty until proven innocent. One of the, I'll just kind of kick this off with a short story here, and you guys feel free to jump in if you've seen something likewise. As you said, Tony, I get called into the hornet's nest, right? War room situation, tiger team, a lot of people call it, 20-something people on the phone. Everybody's looking at their own tool, and inevitably all the lights are green, right? There's nothing wrong, but yet users are still having problems. So, kind of as the hired gun coming in from the outside, if you live, what they say, if you live more than 5 miles from the location, you're the quote-unquote out-of-town expert, right? But, coming into this situation, this was a large retail organization. And, the first thing I ask for is we're coming in, firefighting, troubleshooting, usually an application issue, right? And again, blame the network. The first thing I typically will ask, is, do you have a logical diagram of the network? Do you have, an application chart, this dependency map? And it still baffles me today that there doesn't seem to be any, and this is more apparent, I think, in the larger organizations than it is the small to medium-sized shops, is that nobody ever seems to know, well, here are the web servers are over here, and we think it talks to this server, and we think it talks to that server. And in this specific situation, of course, I asked the question, do you have, a logical diagram of the network? Well, we did, but, Bob was maintaining that, and he got pulled off on another project, and it's, 3 years old now. And, long story short, again, looking at this application performance issue they're having, again, the second question I have, right, is, well, do you have any trace files, right? We're sniffer guys, right? We want to see the packets. We want to see the fingerprints of what's going on the network. And the response I got back was, no, we don't have any trace files, but we've been pinging these servers, and we've been noticing the ping times are going through the roof at certain times of the day. And so I kind of scratched my head and said, okay, you're the owners of this problem. You own the quote unquote packet capture devices, the Wireshark guys, and you have no traces of the problem. And so, I think a lot of times people just need to take a step back and say, what is this problem we're trying to firefight, right? Rather than focusing in on their specific niche, which in this case was latency, right? Pinging the servers. Well, the network looks good. It can't be our problem. But unfortunately, it's not enough for network engineers anymore to just exonerate the problem. They have to prove that it's not the network in this case, and actually be able to troubleshoot and give the information to the developers, that proves that it isn't, right? Whether that's a SQL query that's poorly written, or an application that wasn't written for a latency bound application, work fine on LAN, works horrible over the WAN, must be bandwidth, right? Nobody thinks about the distance. But in this case, again, what we did is we said, okay, let's take a step back and let's look at this from the end user's perspective. Has anybody actually gone out and sat with the user and experienced what they're talking about? When the problem happens, do they take screenshots? So that's really kind of how we ended up troubleshooting this problem. Is I went out and sat with an end user and actually watched what they were seeing, and captured some trace files from the end user's perspective at the remote office to figure out exactly what servers they're hitting. And lo and behold, again, going back to the scariest thing is the pinging. Remember the pinging I was telling you about? They were looking at the wrong servers. Mm-hmm. When the problem occurred, the user wasn't even talking to the servers that actually caused the problem. So I can't overstate the importance of creating application dependency maps and understanding, and it's fairly simplistic to do, right? I mean, just looking for, if most network engineers, right, with the exception of this last one that I was talking about, know what the front end tier is, right? They know the web servers. Mm-hmm. So the simple process of saying, okay, well, what are the web servers talking to? And then saying, okay, what are the servers that the web servers are talking to, and kind of building out that dependency map. And of course, Viavi Solutions has a product to do that. But again, even if you don't, it's it's pretty straightforward. Set up some filters to look for SYN packets coming out of specific IP address ranges, and then go investigate, what protocols, what ports those are running over, and then get together with the applications team to say, okay, are these indeed involved with the application at question? Another very scary thing that I've run into before is along these same lines is, hey, did you guys know that your web servers are talking to databases that are in test? No, they're not. So yeah, I mean, I run into stuff like that on a constant basis, and like I said, you'd think in some of these Fortune 100, Fortune 50 companies, I think IT is a little bit too siloed at times, where you're the firewall guy, or you're the router person, and anything outside of that domain is somebody else's problem. So, ultimately at the end of the day, it's the IT staff that's getting knocked all the way up to the CIO. So that's kind of
I find, if I could just interrupt, I found something interesting. When I work with customers, I do exactly what you said. We go through a bit of a dependency analysis. And what the problem is I run into with a lot of people is, A, they don't have time to do it, and B, they think it's so much more work than it really is. So when you sit down with just literally a napkin or a sheet of paper and you say PC, and literally put a little PC in a line, and you say, okay, logically, what does it talk to? Servers? Or physically, what line and switch and router does it go through? You start drawing that out. You know what you realize pretty quick? That one person does not know the full picture. They have to quickly ask other people with experience, other departments, people who've worked on projects. And I quickly realize a lot of these networks have evolved over the years, and people don't know what's truly there today. They know what was there, what should be there, but when the rubber meets the road, there's that disconnect. They really don't know anymore, right? They just think.
Mm-hmm.
And then you got to figure out how true that is, right?
Well, they don't even know what's normal. That's the first thing I ask. Well, our ping times are high. Well, what's normal? Well, we don't know. And I said, do you realize that an ICMP ping doesn't actually go into your drivers? It just hits the NIC card. The NIC card says, oh, hi. Okay. It doesn't represent anything with the application world. I'm like, come on, people. You got to look at, some baselining. I mean, Mike, when you and I were at Network General back in the 90s, even in the late 80s, we preached, like I preach about taps. We preached about baselining,
Absolutely.
And people today, it's like, I just did a class last night and I was saying, that people say, well, something's weird going on. And then, they find out later that they got a data leak. Because I always ask, do you have an IP spread? What's your IP spread? So if I see any addresses outside of that, might be a problem, like that bank attack last year that went on for 13 months. If any bank had actually looked at the IP addresses, they would have noticed that they had all these foreign IP addresses talking to their verification system at 3 a.m. Okay.
Yeah. Did we open an office in Tunisia?
Yeah. Our new office. But today it's very serious to be looking at what's normal, because that's how you decide if you might have a situation called data leak, which is a nice way of saying, oh, heck, we've been attacked, and should be pretty prevalent today, but people just don't do it.
Exactly. And along those same lines, Tim, I mean, you've in other conversations we've had, talked about some of the FBI statistics on, it's not if, it's when, and, understanding 6 months, 8 months, a year, 2 years later, that's too late, right? And that's, so much of this can be at least averted or learned early by baselining, right? I mean, even some of the trickle data leak type things, especially if your IP address ranges that you quote unquote typically talk to. And then I'm gonna go back to packets, right? I mean, if you're capturing full packets, right, and you're decrypting that either via some type of man in the middle or certificate, you can reassemble that and understand exactly what went out. And here's kind of my horror story number 2. And again, at Viavi, we do a lot of proof of concepts, obviously, right? We go into new customers that have never seen or don't have packet capture, or they're doing SNMP monitoring, which is good. That's a good start. Up, down. What are my traffic loads? But when you start adding packet capture and building out dependency maps and understanding what applications are running on the wire, I obviously not going to mention the customer that I was at, but we put in a device and started monitoring some of the core of their data center, right? Just to kind of show them what traffic was out there, and was given kind of a little presentation after lunch. And I said, hey, did you know that you had 10 gigs of email traffic? Like, 10 gigs of email traffic? Oh no, that's what is that? And that's, well, here's the servers, right? Those aren't email servers. Oh, we got it. And literally, you talk about, how do you stop it? You run into the server room and unplug the device from the switch, right? At that point, they were basically tunneling traffic out of the network, and who knows how long this has gone on, right? Because there was a lack of baselining.
Well, unplugging power is a very rapid way of stopping the problem.
Yeah,
okay.
And a little bit drastic.
Taking away the power or ripping, the Ethernet connector. I was just looking a minute ago at the IC3 stats, and we're 21% ahead this year in attacks, okay, over last year, and over half of the breaches are in the medical healthcare industry, which is, and you've been in it, Tony, you've been in places before, and they are the least protected because they worry about the symptomology and care of patients, just like we need to have our people out here look at the symptomologies, know what's normal. Because you go to a hospital or a doctor, he knows what your blood pressure should be, your pulse should be, your temperature should be, your oxygen saturation should be. In my case, how ugly I am. These are all models, right, for medical. We got to start doing that in our industry. We got to do health checks, baselining, know what's good and what's bad. And when I look at this IC3 report, oh my God, we're 20% ahead of 2015. 2015 was 46% ahead of 2014. We're not getting ahead in this game. We got to get people out there thinking.
Yeah, agreed. And kind of going back to the good old days of shared Ethernet, right? And network general, right? Always preaching baselines, right? Understand what traffic is on your network, and that was for me, back in the late '80s, early '90s, when I started using this magic box called the sniffer. That was just earth-shattering, right? To be able to actually tell what, where, when, and why. And, back in those days, it was, NetWare and slow print services. But, as the networks have grown, and I think Tony said it perfectly, networks evolve, right? Very rarely do you get the opportunity to, unless it's like a new data center, to go in and architect something that, it's most of the time a retrofit of, how do we lay a data access network on top of the network we've already have. And again, I kind of see, the evolution, or at least the talking about moving to ACI or SDN as a prime time to start looking at, how are we going to get that data, right? How are we going to maintain visibility? This kind of goes into the cloud too, but how are we going to maintain current visibility for those organizations that, that have their ducks in a row and are doing baselines, which again, very few and far between. And I think a lot of it is because maybe CIOs are reluctant, or maybe don't quite see the value of having a dedicated team. I've worked with a handful of, quote unquote, performance engineering groups that their sole role in the organization is performance, right? Very large insurance company in Illinois, before an application hits the network, it gets baselined, it gets understood and modeled as to, what is this thing going to do? Number one, to my network and my QoS parameters, but also how is the network going to impact the application, right? And that's another, kind of scary thing, that it goes back to just the lack of dependency diagrams, but understanding what's normal from an application performance perspective. I can't tell you how many times I've gone into an organization where, the quote unquote network is now slow. And you say, well, what's changed? And everybody says, well, nothing. Well, something changed, right? And a lot of the times it's, an application upgrade, or which included database tweaks, right? The defaults are put back in where they're fetching 2 rows at a time, as opposed to what they were doing before. And if you don't have, transactional baselines as well, when that application performance goes from 3 seconds to 13, how do you know where to start, right? So,
well, they did a study in UK, and
I
they
think
said that
the biggest problem.
92%. Okay, go. I'm sorry, Tom. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that I think part of this problem that relates to everything that Mike's throwing out there is just training, and I still find there's a big misconception of what it's for and when to do it. And this has literally happened this week. I'm working with a vendor who sold some equipment to a customer 3 years ago. And for 3 years, we've been trying to schedule the training. And literally, I went over on Monday. And when I talked to them, I said, but what's been going on? What's with the 3 years? And the woman said to me, my manager doesn't believe in training. So we literally waited for him to leave, and then we schedule it. And this brings back something I saw quite a while ago on the internet, and it was just a drawing with two business guys talking, and one was a CEO and the other was a manager, and the argument was, what about training, right? Training, what if we don't train our people? And the manager said, well, what if we don't? Right? Then we're stuck with people without knowledge. And the CIO is saying, well, what if we do train them and they leave? So this is the constant argument. But without that training, without that knowledge, then people think baselining is more work than it really is, right?
Agreed.
And like you said, going to the cloud, going to SDN, if you don't have your ducks in a row, if you don't baseline, then guess what? It becomes a problem that came out of nowhere, which has probably been around for 20 years. It's just you've shifted the architecture and now it matters.
Yeah, and here's another one that I ran into a couple of weeks ago where I just wanted to. It was kind of an introductory meeting with this customer, right? I'd done some consulting work for him in the past, but I wanted to show them some new features, right, in the tool. And I said, what applications are you having problems with today? No, we're not having any problems. And I said, okay, well, hold on. Can you grab a trace for me? Just wide open, from your web servers. Run it wide open, no filters, and grab me 5 or 10 minutes of that trace file. And so he did it, pulled it into the tool, and I found multiple. This application happened to be SAP. I found multiple transactions that were 25, 30 seconds from the end user's perspective, right? Their SOAP calls out to the web tier, and basically, non-indexed database calls, right? And I said, well, hey, you've got these transactions that are impacting your end users, and again, it's kind of that normalcy bias, right? 30-second response time is normal for these end users. So, or they got tired of calling and complaining that things were slow, and they just sucked it up. But again, that's something baselining can attribute to, right? Baselining you can do, has multiple definitions, right? Baseline transactions, baseline, and had they been baselining their transactions, how much money, could you quantify that? 30-second transaction now is down under, a second and a half. And how many thousands of companies have this but don't know it?
Yep.
It's amazing. I was going to say a minute ago that there was a study done in Europe, and they said roughly 92% of the applications that touch the internet, for customer usage or for distributor usage and that, were able to be hacked. Okay? And when you get DDoS attacks, if you've got really bad faulty applications or faulty network, it's really going to impact you more than if you have, and people talk about security all the time, and I'm like, if you don't know what's normal, you don't have security. Go just take $1,000 and go throw it down on a horse that you don't know. I mean, it's the same gamble. You're going to lose, and it's amazing though. And I remember at Network General in the early days when I was the WAN guy, you remember, and I used to preach, figure out, because in those days WANs were even smaller than they are today, okay? And people still think that it's infinite. There was a study done by American Express. I think it was American Express. Wall Street Journal. And 82% of the people in companies believe that their company had unlimited bandwidth, so that's why they were deploying their own applications, doing their stuff on the internet at work, because they had unlimited bandwidth.
Yeah.
Wrong.
Well, yeah,
you're absolutely right.
In the days where 56 DDS line was common and high speed was a T1, right? If you're really lucky. But yeah, I mean, it's I'll pose this challenge to the people watching this. How many of you can tell me on your inbound internet connection what the normal number of concurrent TCP connections are? What's normal?
Wow.
There's your DDoS, right?
Right.
there's your very quick understanding of when we're being affected by DDoS. And I think a lot of people are, their first reaction or their first is, man, things are really slow. But maybe the DDoS started 4 hours ago, and now your users are just getting around to telling you about it.
Well, I tell people that a lot of today's network engineering is based upon the rut row theory, the Scooby theory. Rut row, we got a problem, and we really shouldn't have to do that. And that's one thing I've always liked about Network Instruments or Viavi is it gave you a chance to take your technology and actually apply it in a baseline or a records-based type application. If you don't have records, you don't have a baseline, you don't know what's normal, then be happy with whatever you get because you're not going to know it. And like you said, most of the end users, the old joke used to be as Mary was out partying all weekend and comes in Monday and she can barely keep her eyes open. But Tuesday, she gets 12 hours of sleep, has 5 cups of coffee and 16 donuts. The network is not going to be fast enough for her.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, user response time is that's very relative, right? And you see this all the time. I'm sure Tony, what one user in the cubicle thinks is slow, the next one over thinks is fast, right? Oh yeah, there's nothing wrong. So again, going back to understanding. And one of the things, again, I'll put a little plug in for Viavi here is the ability to go back in time, right, from a forensic perspective, and being able to, a lot of times I'll go out to customers, they'll say, well, how much data can you archive? And I kind of chuckle a little bit. It's how much do you want, right? How much, it's a budgetary item. I mean, 1.5 petabytes. So. Yeah, it's very interesting on the very few people are not in that rut row situation, Tim. It's like I said, I see it daily.
Hey, Mike, I wonder how does all of this translate to SDN? Because all the stuff we're talking about is great, but people think it's more of a local issue. And when you go to the cloud and when you go to SDN, none of this matters anymore.
Yeah, that's a huge misconception on, in fact, there are certain SDN vendor that shall remain nameless telling people they no longer need packet capture, right? Because, we've got all the statistics you're ever going to want to know. And, packets in, packets out on a switch port, I want to know more than that, right? I want to, and none of those statistics have anything to do with the application performance itself, which is really, at the end of the day, yes, we're all quote-unquote network engineers, but we are responsible for everything that touches the wire, right, or wireless in some cases. SDN, again, I see more people talking about it than people actually doing it. As you mentioned up front, we do have a roundtable discussion webinar coming up on the 9th, and like I said, the links will be at below. We're having some of the predominant SDN, quote unquote, I hate using the word experts, right, but architects that have done this time and time again, and talking about some of the pitfalls. And we're also going to talk about what that means from a monitoring and more from a visibility perspective, right? I mean, you still have applications that are running on a network that are going to have performance problems, right? And I've got an article that I've kind of put together that I'm going to be sending up to Love My Tool. It'll be in Tim's inbox very shortly, talking about how do we get packets in an SDN architecture, an ACI architecture specifically for Cisco, and and it comes down to tapping, right? It comes down to tapping the spine and the leaf, and all that inter switch traffic is going to go back up to the spine before it goes back down to the leaf. So it's not unlike the Nexus top of the rack architecture that we've been used to. it's conceptually the same type of thing. But the thing that's going to be challenging, right, is and at Viavi we've got an answer for this, obviously. The 40 gig BiDi, which is what the spine and tap uplinks are going to be typically. Potential for seeing a lot of data, a lot of packets, which means for all the reasons we talked about before, got to have them, got to capture them.
Well, I mean, the whole idea behind SDN is to dichotomize the data plane from the control plane.
Mm-hmm.
So when you do that, you're eliminating that visibility at that level you need it. And I have heard people say, SDN, you don't need anything anymore. It does everything. Well, let me tell you this. From a hacker's perspective, I only have one device to go after now instead of multiple devices. So that's a warning sign. Number two is you don't have visibility. Okay? It's a virtual network. What does virtual mean? It exists sort of in the cloud somewhere. Okay? People for some reason think when they deploy new technology, it's got FM. That stands for freaking magic. And it doesn't have. Okay? It's not going to cure everything that you left behind from the last disaster in your network. So I'm looking forward to talking about SDN because I've seen some really silly things around it. And I think it's imperative for people to get a deeper understanding of what they're getting themselves into, and also don't believe anything that vendors tell you.
That's true.
Well, Mike, just in the I guess the context of time and stuff, if you want to quickly ramble off a bit about SDN, we can get that in before we run out of time.
Yeah. So what I'm going to refer everybody to, Tony, is the SDN roundtable discussion that we're having.
Cool.
It's going to talk about some of the pitfalls, right? So things that Tim was just mentioning, we've got people that have been there, that have deployed it, that have made the mistakes, right? And we're going to break it down. We're going to talk about what is it? Do you really need it, right? Is this something that's actually going to be cost beneficent? Is it going to be, are you going to see performance increases? And then lastly, as part of that is, how do you monitor it? How do you get the same visibility out of an SDN infrastructure that you're getting today, to make sure that, your applications are continuing to perform?
Cool. I've actually put the show information and links on the YouTube description and Love My Tool show notes already. So people can go there to get those links to attend those sessions.
And Mike's article will be up certainly before the next session. And if you're going to be on that, you should read that as an informative piece and be ready to either ask questions or be amazed.
I don't know about be amazed, but ask questions, definitely. Yeah, we're doing this kind of a little bit different format. It's not going to be slideware. It's going to be a bunch of guys getting together talking about SDN and taking questions. So I'm excited.
Cool. Great. So then what we'll do is, since that was easy, I thought it was going to take more time, but Mike hit it right on the head. That's awesome. So we're trying to keep this to 30 minutes. So I think I'll just wrap this up. So I want to thank Mr. Mike Canney for his time and knowledge and tidbits of life.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Thank good old Tim O'Neill for the drum roll and his support and his wisdom as well. And again, I'm Tony Fortunato from the technology firm, and thanks for giving us a bit of your time. Have a good day.